Hi. Happy Easter, happy Passover, happy spring. It's a beautiful day here in New York. Yeah. I hope everyone is managing isolation okay, and looking after themselves. I'm going to give it like another minute, and then we'll start reading. I've been listening to actually another Ursula Le Guin book from the library through the Libby app. It's Tehanu from the Earthsea series. And oh man, it's so good. It's like I've listened to Wizard of Earthsea and Tombs of Atuan, and my library doesn't have the audio book for, or maybe also even the digital book for the third book in the series, but Tehanu is my favorite so far. Like the others are good, but like, oh man, it's about to me it's so much about like grief and survival and like the finer points of daily life in a world with magic, but like really sort of unglamorous so far. I'm about halfway through, and most of the characters are women, which is really great. And yeah, I'm really liking it. It's the language is beautiful, and it's sort of what I didn't realize it's what I've been needing to listen to, but it absolutely is. So, let's get started with this Ursula Le Guin. So this is chapter 11, Soliloquies in Mishnori. Mishnori, Streth susmi. I am not hopeful, yet all events show cause for hope. Obsley haggles and dickers with his fellow commensals. Yege employs blandishments. Slos proselytizes, and the strength of their following grows. They are astute men, and have their faction well in hand. Only 7 of the 33 are reliable open traders. Of the rest, Obsley thinks to gain the sure support of 10, giving a bare majority. One of them seems to have a true interest in the envoy. Councillor Ithilpen of Ainyen district, who has been curious about the alien mission since, while working for the SARF, he was in charge of censoring the broadcasts we sent out from Erenrong. He seems to carry the weight of those suppressions on his conscience. He proposed to Obsley that the 33 announce their invitation to the starship not only to their countrymen, but at the same time will not ask Karhide to join them in anything. The Sarf's men, among the 33, of course, oppose any consideration at all of the envoy's presence and mission. As for those lukewarm and uncommitted whom Obsley hopes to enlist, I think they fear the envoy, much as Argiven and most of the court did, with this difference that Argiven thought him mad, like himself, while they think him a liar, like themselves. They fear to swallow a great hoax in public, a hoax already refused by Karhide, a hoax perhaps invented by Karhide. They make their invitation, they make it publicly, then where is their Shifgathor when no starship comes? Indeed, Genli I demands of us an inordinate trustfulness. To him, evidently, it is not inordinate. And Obsley and Yege think that a majority of the 33 will be persuaded to trust him. I do not know why I am less hopeful than they. Perhaps I do not really want Orgarain to prove more enlightened than Karhide, to take the risk and win the praise and leave Karhide in the shadow. If this envy be patriotic, it comes too late. As soon as I saw that Tybe would soon have me ousted, I did all I could to ensure that the envoy would come to Orgarain, and in exile here I have done what I could to win them to him. Thanks to the money he brought me from Asha, I now live by myself again, as a unit, not a dependent. I go to no more banquets, am not seen in public with Obslay or other supporters of the envoy, and have not seen the envoy himself for over a half-month since his second day in Mishnori. He gave me Asha's money as one would give a hired assassin his fee. I have not often been so angry, and I insulted him deliberately. He knew I was angry, but I am not sure he understood that he was insulted. He seemed to accept my advice, despite the manner of its giving, and when my temper cooled, I saw this and was worried by it. Is it possible that all along in Ehrenrang he was seeking my advice, not knowing how to tell me that he sought it? If so, then he must have misunderstood half and not understood the rest of what I told him by my fireside in the palace the night after the ceremony of the keystone. His Shifgrathor must be founded and composed and sustained altogether differently from ours. And when I thought myself most blunt and frank with him, he must have found me most subtle and unclear. His obtuseness is ignorance. His arrogance is ignorance. He is ignorant of us, we of him. He is infinitely a stranger, and I a fool to let my shadow cross the light let my shadow cross the light of the hope he brings us. I keep my mortal vanity down. I keep out of his way, for clearly that is what he wants. He is right. An exiled Karhidish traitor is no credit to his cause. Conformable to the Orgota law that each unit must have employment, I work from 8th hour to noon in a plastics factory. Easy work. I run a machine which fits together and heat bonds pieces of plastic to form little transparent boxes. I do not know what the boxes are for. In the afternoon, finding myself dull, I have taken up the old disciplines I learned in Rotherher. I am glad to see I have lost no skill at summoning Dotha strength or entering the untrance, but I get little good out of the untrance. And as for the skills of stillness and of fasting, I might as well never have learned them, and must start over like a child. I have fasted now 1 day, and my belly screams, a week, a month. The nights freeze now. Tonight a hard wind bears frozen rain. All evening I have thought continually of Estra, and the sound of the wind seems the sound of the wind that blows there. I wrote to my son tonight, a long letter. While writing it, I had again and again a sense of Arek's presence, as if I should see him if I turned. Why do I keep such notes as these? For my son to read. Little good they would do him. I write to be writing in my own language, perhaps. Harhahadsusmi. Still no mention of the envoy has been made on the radio, not a word. I wonder if Genli Eye sees that in Orgarain, despite the vast visible apparatus of government, nothing is done visibly, nothing is said aloud. The machine conceals the machinations. Tybe wants to teach Karhide how to live. He takes his lessons from Orgarain, a good school. But I think we shall have trouble learning how to lie, having for so long practiced the art of going round and round the truth without ever lying about it, or reaching it either. A big Orgota foray yesterday across the Eye. They burned the granaries of Tekember. Precisely what the Sarf wants and what Tybe wants. But where does it end? Slos, having turned his Yomesh mysticism onto the envoy's statements, interprets the coming of the Ecumen to earth as the coming of the reign of Mesha among men, and loses sight of our purpose. We must hate this rivalry with Karhide before the new men come, he says. We must cleanse our spirits of their coming. We must forego Shifgrithor, forbid all acts of vengeance, and unite together without envy as brothers of one hearth. But how until they come? How to break the circle? Gairni Susmi. Slos heads a committee that proposes to suppress the obscene plays performed in public kemer houses here. They must be like the Karhidish Huth. Slos opposes them because they are trivial, vulgar, and blasphemous. To oppose something is to maintain it. They say here, all roads lead to Mishnori. To be sure, if you turn your back on Mishnori and walk away from it, you are still on the Mishnori road. To oppose vulgarity is inevitably to be vulgar. You must go somewhere. You must have another goal. Then you walk a different road. Yege in the hall of the 33 today. I unalterably oppose this blockade of grain exports to Karhide and the spirit of competition which motivates it. Right enough, but he will not get off the Mishnori road going that way. He must offer an alternative. Orgarain and Karhide both must stop following the road they're on in either direction. They must go somewhere else and break the circle. Yege, I think, should be talking of the envoy and of nothing else. To be an atheist is to maintain God, his existence or his non-existence. It amounts to much the same on the plane of proof. Thus, proof is a word not often used among the Handurata, who have chosen not to treat God as a fact, subject either to proof or to belief, and they have broken the circle and go free. To learn which questions are unanswerable and not to answer them. This skill is most needful in times of stress and darkness. Tormenbad Susme. My unease grows. Still not one word about the envoy has been spoken on the Central Bureau radio. None of the news about him that we used to broadcast from Erhenrang was ever released here, and rumors rising out of illegal radio reception over the border and traders and travelers' stories never seemed to have spread far. The Sarf has more complete control over communications than I knew or thought possible. The possibility is awesome. In Karhide, King and Kiarami have a good deal of control over what people do, but very little over what they hear, and none over what they say. Here, the government can check not only act but thought. Surely no men should have such power over others. Shuskis and others take Genli eye about the city openly. I wonder if he sees that this openness hides the fact that he is hidden. No one knows he is here. I ask my fellow workers at the factory. They know nothing and think I am talking of some crazy Yomesh sectarian. No information, no interest, nothing that might advance Ai's cause or protect his life. It is a pity he looks so like us. In Erhenrang, people often pointed him out on the street, for they knew some truth or talk about him and knew he was there. Here, where his presence is kept secret, his person goes unremarked. They see him no doubt much as I first saw him, an unusually tall, husky, and dark youth just entering Kemer. I studied the physician's reports on him last year. His differences from us are profound. They are not superficial. One must know him to know him an alien. Why do they hide him then? Why does not one of the common cells force the issue and speak of him in a public speech or on the radio? Why is even Obsley silent? Out of fear. My king was afraid of the envoy. These fellows are afraid of one another. I think that I, a foreigner, am the only person Obsley trusts. He has some pleasure in my company, as I in his, and several times has waved Shifgrithor and frankly asked my advice. But when I urge him to speak out, to raise public interest as a defense against factional intrigue. He does not hear me. If the entire commensality had their eyes on the envoy, the Sarf would not dare touch him, I say. Or you, Obsley. Obsley sighs. Yes, yes, but we can't do it, Estraven. Radio, printed bulletins, scientific periodicals, they're all in the Sarf's hands. What am I to do? Make speeches on a street corner like some fanatic priest? Well, one can talk to people, set rumors going. I had to do something of the same sort last year in Erenrong. Get people asking questions to which you have the answer, that is, the envoy himself. If only he'd bring that damned ship down of his own here, so that we had something to show people. But as it is, he won't bring his ship down until he knows that you're acting in good faith. Am I not? Cries Obsley, fattening out like a great hobfish. Haven't I spent every hour of the past month on this business? Good faith. He expects us to believe whatever he tells us and then doesn't trust us in return. Should he? Obsley puffs and does not reply. He comes nearer honesty than any Orgota government official I know. Odgethne Susmi. In case it's not clear, these are dates. So this is Estraven's journal. To become a high official in the Sarf, one must have, it seems, a certain complex form of stupidity. Gom exemplifies it. He sees me as a Karhaidish agent attempting to lead Orgarain into a tremendous prestige loss by persuading them to believe in the hoax of the envoy from the Ecumen. He thinks that I spent my time as Prime Minister preparing this hoax. By God, I have better things to do than play Shifgrathor with scum. But that is a simplicity he is unequipped to see. Now that Yege has apparently cast me off, Gom thinks I must be purchasable, and so prepared to buy me out in his own curious fashion. He has watched me, or had me watched, close enough that he knew I would be due to enter Kemer on Posthe or Tormenbod. So he turned up last night in full Kemer, hormone-induced no doubt, ready to seduce me. An accidental meeting on Pinefen Street. Hearth, I haven't seen you in a half-month. Where have you been hiding yourself lately? Come, have a cup of ale with me. He chose an alehouse next door to one of the Commensal public Kemer houses. He ordered us not ale, but life water. He meant to waste no time. After one glass, he put his hand on mine and shoved his face up close, whispering, "We didn't meet by chance. I waited for you. I crave you for my Kemmering tonight," and he called me by my given name. I did not cut his tongue out, because since I left Estra, I don't carry a knife. I told him that I intended to abstain while in exile. He cooed and muttered and held on to my hands. He was going very rapidly into full phase as a woman. Gom is very beautiful in Kemer, and he counted on his beauty and his sexual insistence, knowing, I suppose, that being of the Handara, I would be unlikely to use Kemer reaction drugs, and would make a point of abstinence against the odds. He forgot that detestation is as good as any drug. I got free of his pawing, which, of course, was having some effect on me, and left him, suggesting that he try the public Kemer house next door. At that, he looked at me with pitiable hatred, for he was, however false his purpose, truly in Kemer, and deeply roused. Did he really think I'd sell myself for his small change? He must think me very uneasy, which indeed makes me uneasy. Damn them, these unclean men. There is not one clean man among them. Odsarni, Susmi. This afternoon, Genli I spoke in the hall of the 33. No audience was permitted, and no broadcast made, but Obsley later had me in and played me his own tape of the session. The envoy spoke well, with moving candor and urgency. There is an innocence in him that I have found merely foolish and foreign, yet in another moment that seeming innocence reveals a discipline of knowledge and a largeness of purpose that awes me. Through him speaks a shrewd and magnanimous people, a people who have woven together into one wisdom a profound, terrible, old, and unimaginably various experience of life. But he himself is young, impatient, and inexperienced. He stands higher than we stand, seeing wider, but he is himself only the height of a man. He speaks better now than he did in Aranrong, more simply and more subtly. He has learned his job in doing it, like us all. His speech was often interrupted by members of the domination faction demanding that the president stop this lunatic, turn him out, and get on with the order of business. Commensal Yemen Bey. Sorry, just a sec. What? Commensal Yemen Bey was most obstreperous and probably spontaneous. "You don't swallow this gitchy-mitchy," he kept roaring across to Obsley. Planned interruptions which made part of the tape hard to follow were led, Obsley says, by Caharosal, from memory, Alshel presiding. "Mr. Envoy, we find this information and the proposals made by Mr. Obsley, Mr. Sloss, Mr. Ithapen, Mr. Yegany, and others most interesting, most stimulating. We need, however, a little more to go on." Laughter. "Since the King of Karhide has the vehicle you arrived on locked up where we can't see it, would it be possible, as suggested, for you to bring down your starship? What do you call it?" I. "Starship is a very good name, sir." Alshel. "Oh, what do you call it?" I. "Well, technically, it's a manned interstellar Setian design Nafel 20. Voice. "You're sure it's not St. Pethed's sled?" Laughter. Alshel. "Please, yes. Well, if you can get this ship down onto the ground here, solid ground, you might say, so that we can, as it were, have some substantial fish guts." I want very much to bring the ship down, Mr. Alshel, as proof and witness of our reciprocal good faith. I await only your preliminary public announcement of the event." Caharosal. "Don't you see, Commensals, what all this is? It's not just a stupid joke. It is, in intention, a public mockery of our credibility, our gullibility, our stupidity, engineered with incredible impudence by this person who stands here before us today. You know he comes from Karhide. You know he is a Karhide-ish agent. You can see he is a sexual deviant of a type which in Karhide, due to the influence of the dark cult, is left uncured and sometimes is even artificially created for the foreteller's orgies. And yet, when he says, 'I'm from outer space,' some of you actually shut your eyes, abuse your intellects, and believe. Never could I have thought it possible, etc., etc." To judge by the tape, I withstood jibes and assaults with patience. Obsley says he handled himself well. I was hanging about outside the hall to see them come out after the session of the 33. I had a grim, pondering look. Well, he might. My helplessness is intolerable. I was one who set this machine running, and now cannot control its running. I slink in the streets with my hood pulled forward to catch a glimpse of the envoy. For this my useless, sneaking life, I threw away my power, my money, and my friends. What a fool you are, Theron. Why can I never set my heart on a possible thing? Odep Susmi. The transmitting device, Genly I, has now turned over to the 33, and Obsley's care is not going to change any minds. No doubt it does what he says it does, but if royal mathematician Shorst would say of it only, "I don't understand the principles," then no Orgota mathematician or engineer will do much better, and nothing is proved or disproved. An admirable outcome were this world won fastness of the Handara, but alas, we must walk forward, troubling the new snow, proving and disproving, asking and answering. Once more I pressed on Obsley the feasibility of having I radio his starship, waken the people aboard, and ask them to converse with the Commensals by radio hookup to the Hall of the 33. This time, Obsley had a reason ready for not doing so. "Listen, Estraven, my dear, the SARF runs all our radio. You know that by now. I have no idea, even I, which of the men in communications are the SARF men, most of them, no doubt, for I know as a fact that they run the transmitters and receivers on every level, right down to the technicians and repairmen. They could and would block or falsify any transmission we received if we did not receive one. If we did receive one. Can you imagine that scene in the hall? We outer spacers, victims of our own hoax, listening with bated breath to a clutter of static, and nothing else. No answer, no message. And you have no money to hire some loyal technician, or buy off some of theirs? I asked, but no use. His fears are for his own prestige. His behavior towards me is already changed. If he calls off his reception for the envoy tonight, things are in a bad way. Odarhad sus me. He called off the reception. This morning I went to see the envoy in proper Orgota style, not openly at Shuskis's house, where the staff must be crawling with SARF agents, Shuskis himself being one, but in the street, by chance, Gom fashion, sneaking and creeping. "Mr. I, will you hear me a moment?" He looked around, startled, and recognizing me, alarmed. After a moment he broke out, "What good is it, Mr. Harth? You know I can't rely on what you say, since Aaron." That was candid, if not perceptive. Yet it was perceptive, too. He knew that I wanted to advise him, not to ask something of him, and spoke to save my pride. I said, "This is Mishnori, not Aaron, but the danger you are in is the same. If you cannot persuade Obsley or Yege to let you make radio contact with your ship, so that the people aboard it can, while remaining safe, lend some support to your statements, then I think you should use your own instrument, the Ansible, and call the ship down at once. The risk it will run is less than the risk you are running now, alone. The Commensal's debates concerning my messages have been kept secret. How do you know about my statements, Mr. Harth?" "Because I have made it my life's business to know." "But it is not your business here, sir. It is up to the Commensals of Orgarain." "I tell you that you're in danger of your life, Mr. I said. To that he said nothing, and I left him. I should have spoken to him days ago. It is too late. Fear undoes his mission and my hope once more. Not fear of the alien, the unearthly, not here. These Orgota have not the wits nor size of spirit to fear what is truly and immensely strange. They cannot even see it. They look at the man from another world and see what? A spy from Karhide, a pervert, an agent, a sorry little political unit like themselves. If he does not send for the ship at once, it will be too late. It may be already too late. It is my fault. I have done nothing right. Chapter 12, On Time and Darkness. From the Sayings of Tehulme the High Priest, a book of Yomesh Canon composed in North Orgarain about 900 years ago. Mesha is the center of time, that moment of his life when he saw all things clearly, came when he had lived on earth 30 years, and after it he lived on earth again 30 years, so that the seeing befell in the center of his life. And all the ages up until the seeing were as long as the ages will be after the seeing, which befell in the center of time. And in the center there is no time past and no time to come. In all time past it is, in all time to come it is. It has not been yet, nor will it be. It is. It is all. Nothing is unseen. The poor man of Shene came to Meshech, lamenting that he had not food to give the children of his flesh, nor grain to sow, for the rains had rotted the seed in the ground, and all the folk of his hearth starved. Meshech said, "Dig in the stone fields of Turesh, and you will find there a treasure of silver and precious stones. For I see a king bury it there, 10,000 years ago, when a neighboring king presses feud upon him." The poor man of Sheni dug in the moraines of Turesh, and unearthed where Meshech pointed a great hoard of ancient jewels, and at sight of it he shouted aloud for joy. But Meshech, standing, wept at sight of it, saying, "I see a man kill his hearth brother for one of those carven stones. That is 10,000 years from now, and the bones of the murdered man will lie in this grave where the treasure lies. O man of Shene, I know too where your grave is. I see you lying in it." The life of every man is in the center of time, for all were seen in the seeing of Meshech and are in his eye. We are the pupils of his eye. Our doing is his seeing, our being his knowing. A hemon tree in the heart of Ornan Forest, which lies 100 miles long and 100 miles wide, was old and greatly grown, with 100 branches, and on every branch 1,000 twigs, and on every twig 100 leaves. The tree said in its rooted being, "All my leaves are seen, but one, this one in the darkness cast by all the others. This one leaf I keep secret to myself. Who will see it in the darkness of my leaves, and who will count the number of them?" Meshech passed through the forest of Ornan in his wanderings, and from that one tree he plucked that one leaf. No raindrop falls in the storms of autumn that ever fell before, and the rain has fallen and falls and will fall throughout all the autumns of the years. Meshech saw each drop, where it fell and falls and will fall. In the eye of Meshech are all the stars, and the darknesses between the stars, and all are bright. In the answering of the question of the Lord of Shorth, in the moment of the seeing, Meshech saw all the sky as if it were all one sun. Above the earth and under the earth, all the sphere of the sky was bright as the sun's surface, and there was no darkness. For he saw not what was, nor what will be, but what is. The stars that flee and take away their light all were present in his eye, and all their light shone presently. Footnote. This is a mystical expression of one of the theories used to support the expanding universe hypothesis, first proposed by the mathematical school of Sith over 4,000 years ago, and generally accepted by later cosmologists, even though meteorological conditions on Gethen prevent their gathering much observational support from astronomy. The rate of expansion, Hubble's constant, Reherek's constant, can in fact be estimated from the observed amount of light in the night sky. The point here involved is that if the universe were not expanding, the night sky would not appear to be dark. Darkness is only in the mortal eye that thinks it sees but sees not. In the sight of Meshech there is no darkness. Therefore, those that call upon the darkness, the Handarada, are made fools of and spat out from the mouth of Meshech, for they name what is not, calling it source and end. There is neither source nor end, for all things are in the center of time. As all the stars may be reflected on a round raindrop falling in the night, so too do all the stars reflect the raindrop. There is neither darkness nor death, for all things are in the light of the moment, and their end and their beginning are one. One center, one seeing, one law, one light. Look now into the eye of Meshech. Chapter 13, Down on the Farm. So it's been a while since I read this, but I think this is a chapter or either leading into or where like Genli does become a political prisoner. And if I remember, that is kind of rough. I think some people die. But just worth warning here that this might be a rough chapter if you are not in the mood for something like that right now. Okay, so chapter 13, Down on the Farm. Alarmed by Estervan's sudden reappearance, his familiarity with my affairs, and the fierce urgency of his warnings, I hailed a taxi and drove straight to Obslay's Island, meaning to ask the commensal how Estervan knew so much, and why he had suddenly popped up from nowhere, urging me to do precisely what Obslay yesterday had advised against doing. The commensal was out. The doorkeeper did not know where he was or when he would be back in. I went to Yege's house with no better luck. A heavy snow, the heaviest of the autumn so far, was falling. My driver refused to take me farther than to Shuskis's house, as he did not have snow cleats on his tires. That evening, I failed to reach Obslay, Yege, or Schloss by telephone. At dinner, Shuskis explained. A Yomesh festival was going on, the solemnity of the saints and throne upholders, and high officials of the commensality were expected to be seen at the temples. He also explained that Estervan's behavior, shrewdly enough, as that of a man once powerful and now fallen, who grasps at any chance to influence persons or events, always less rationally, more desperately, as time passes and he knows himself sinking into powerless anonymity. I agreed that this would explain Estervan's anxious, almost frantic manner. The anxiety had, however, affected me. I was vaguely ill at ease all through that long and heavy meal. Shuskis talked and talked to me, and to many employees, aides, and sycophants who sat down at his table nightly. I have never known him so long-winded, so relentlessly jovial. When dinner was over, it was pretty late for going out again, and in any case, the solemnity would keep all the commensals busy, as Shuskis said, until after midnight. I decided to pass up supper and went to bed early. Sometime between midnight and dawn, I was awakened by strangers, informed that I was under arrest and taken by an armed guard to the Kunderschaden prison. Kunderschaden is very old, one of the few very old buildings left in Missionary. I had noticed it often as I went about the city, a long, grimy, many-towered, ill-looking place, distinct among the pallid bulks and hulks of the commensal edifices. It is what it looks like and is called. It is a jail. It is not a front for something else, not a facade, not a pseudonym. It is real, the real thing, the thing beyond words. The guards, a sturdy, solid lot, hustled me through the corridors and left me alone in a small room, very dirty and very brightly lit. In a few minutes, another lot of guards came crowding in as escort to a thin-faced man with an air of authority. He dismissed all but two. I asked him if I would be allowed to send word to Commensal Obslay. The Commensal knows of your arrest. I said, knows of it? Very stupidly. My superiors act, of course, by order of the 33. You will now undergo interrogation. The guards caught my arms. I resisted them, saying angrily, I'm willing to answer what you ask. You can leave out the intimidation. The thin-faced man paid no attention, but called back another guard. The three of them got me, stripped me, and injected me with, I suppose, one of the veridical drugs. I don't know how long the questioning lasted or what it concerned, as I was drugged more or less heavily all the time and have no memory of it. When I came to myself again, I had no idea how long I had been kept in Kunderschaden, 4 or 5 days, judging from my physical condition, but I was not sure. For some while after that, I did not know what day of the month it was, nor what month, and in fact, I came only slowly to comprehend my surroundings at all. I was in a caravan truck, much like the truck that had carried me over the Khargav to Rare, but in the van, not the cab. There were 20 or 30 other people in with me. Hard to tell how many, since there were no windows, and light came in only through a slit in the rear door, screened with 4 thicknesses of steel mesh. We had evidently been traveling some while when I recovered conscious thought, as each person's place was more or less defined, and the smell of excreta, vomit, and sweat had already reached a point it neither surpassed nor declined from. No one knew any of the others. No one knew where we were being taken. There was little talking. It was the second time I had been locked in the dark with the uncomplaining, unhopeful people of Orgarain. I knew now the sign I had been given my first night in the country. I had ignored that black cellar and gone looking for the substance of Orgarain above ground, in daylight. No wonder nothing had seemed real. I felt that the truck was going east and couldn't get rid of that impression, even when it became plain that it was going west, farther and farther into Orgarain. One's magnetic and directional subsenses are all wrong on other planets. When the intellect won't or can't compensate for that wrongness, the result is a profound bewilderment, a feeling that everything, literally, has come loose. One of the truckload died that night. He had been clubbed or kicked in the abdomen, and had died hemorrhaging from anus and mouth. No one did anything for him. There was nothing to be done. A plastic jug of water had been shoved in amongst us some hours before, but it was long since dry. The man happened to be next to me on the right, and I took his head on my knees and gave him relief in breathing, so he died. We were all naked, but thereafter I wore his blood for clothing, on my legs and thighs and hands, a dry, stiff, brown garment with no warmth in it. The night grew bitter, and we had to get close together for warmth. The corpse, having nothing to give, was pushed out of the group, excluded. The rest of us huddled together, swaying and jolting, all in one motion, all night. Darkness was total inside of our steel box. We were on some country road, and no truck followed us. Even with face pressed up close to the mesh, one could see nothing out of the door slit but darkness and the vague gloom of fallen snow. Falling snow, new fallen snow, long fallen snow, snow after rain has fallen on it, refrozen snow. Orgota and Karhaidish have a word for each of these. In Karhaidish, which I know better than Orgota, they have, by my count, 62 words for the various kinds, stages, ages, and qualities of snow. Fallen snow, that is. There is another of snowfall, another for ice, a set of 20 or more that define what the temperature range is, how strong a wind blows, and what kind of precipitation is occurring, all together. I sat and tried to draw up lists of these words in my head that night. Each time I recalled another one, I would repeat the lists, inserting it in its alphabetical place. Along after dawn, the truck stopped. People screamed out the slit that there was a dead body in the truck, come and take it out. One after another of us screamed and shouted. We pounded together on the sides and door, making so hideous a pandemonium inside the steel box that we could not stand it ourselves. No one came. The truck stood still for some hours. At last there was a sound of voices outside. The truck lurched, skidding on an ice patch, and set off again. One could see through the slit that it was late on a sunny morning, and that we were going through wooded hills. The truck continued thus for 3 more days and nights, 4 in all since my awakening. It made no stops at inspection points, and I think it never passed through a town of any size. Its journey was erratic, furtive. There were stops to change drivers and recharge batteries. There were other longer stops for no reason that could be discerned from inside the van. 2 of the days it sat still from noon till dark, as if deserted, then began its run again at night. Once a day, around noon, a big jug of water was passed in through a trap in the door. Counting the corpse, there were 26 of us, 2 13s. Gathenians often think in 13s, 26s, 52s, no doubt because of the 26-day lunar cycle that makes their unvarying month and approximates their sexual cycle. The corpse was shoved up tight against the steel doors that formed the rear wall of our box, where he would keep cold. The rest of us sat and lay crouched, each in his own place, his territory, his domain until night, when the cold grew so extreme that little by little we drew together and merged into one entity occupying one space, warm in the middle, the periphery. An old man and one with a bad cough were recognized as being least resistant to the cold, and each night we were at the center of the group, the entity of 25, where it was warmest. We did not struggle for the warm place. We simply were in it each night. It is a terrible thing, this kindness that human beings do not lose. Terrible because when we are finally naked in the dark and cold, it is all we have. We who are so rich, so full of strength, we end up with that small change. We have nothing else to give. Despite our crowdedness and our huddling together nights, we in the truck were remote from one another. Some were stupefied from drugging, some were probably mental or social defectives to start with. All were abused and scared, yet it may be strange that among 25, not one ever spoke to all the others together, not even to curse them. Kindness there was, and endurance, but in silence, always silence. Jammed together in the sour darkness of our shared mortality, we bumped one another continually, jolted together, fell over one another, breathed our breaths mingling, lay the heat of our bodies together as a fire is laid, but remained strangers. I never learned the name of any of them in the truck. One day, the 3rd day, I think, when the truck stopped still for hours and I wondered if they had simply left us someplace in some desert to rot, one of them began to talk to me. He kept telling me a long story about a mill in South Orgarene where he had worked, and how he had got into trouble with an overseer. He talked and talked in his soft, dull voice, and kept putting his hand on mine as if to be sure he had my attention. The sun was getting west of us, and as we stood, slewed around on the shoulder of the road and shaft, and the sun was getting west of us, and as we stood slewed around on the shoulder of the road, a shaft of light entered in the window slit. Suddenly, even back in the box, one could see. I saw a girl. A filthy, pretty, stupid, weary girl, looking up into my face as she talked, smiling timidly, looking for solace. The young Orgota was in Khmer and had been drawn to me. The one time any of them asked anything of me, and I couldn't give it. I got up and went to the window slit as if for air and to look out, and did not come back to my place for a long time. That night the truck went up long grades, down, up again. From time to time it halted inexplicably. At each halt, a frozen, unbroken silence lay outside the steel walls of our box, the silence of vast wastelands, of the heights. The one in Khmer still kept the place beside mine and still sought to touch me. I stood up for a long time again with my face pressed to the steel mesh of the window, breathing clean air that cut my throat and lungs like a razor. My hands pressed against the metal door became numb. I realized at last they were, or soon would be, frostbitten. My breath had made a little ice bridge between my lips and the mesh. I had to break this bridge with my fingers before I could turn away. When I huddled down with the others, I began to shake with cold, a kind of shaking I had not experienced, jumping, racking spasms like the convulsions of a fever. The truck started up again. Noise and motion gave the illusion of warmth, dispelling that utter glacial silence, but I was still too cold to sleep that night. I thought we were at a fairly high altitude most of the night, but it was hard to tell, one's breathing, heartbeat, and energy level being unreliable indicators given the circumstances. As I knew later, we were crossing the Sembène that night and must have gone up over 9,000 feet in the passes. I was not much troubled by hunger. The last meal I remembered eating was that long and heavy dinner in Shuskis's house. They must have fed me in Kunderschaden, but I had no recollection of it. Eating did not seem to be a part of this existence in the steel box, and I did not often think about it. Thirst, on the other hand, was one of the permanent conditions of life. Once daily, at a stop, the trap, evidently set into the rear door for this purpose, was unbolted. One of us thrust out the plastic jug, and it was soon thrust back in filled, along with a brief gust of icy air. There was no way to measure out the water among us. The jug was passed, and each got 3 or 4 good swallows before the next hand reached for it. No one person or group acted as dispensers or guardians. None saw to it that a drink was saved for the man who coughed, though he was now in a high fever. I suggested this once, and those around me nodded, but it was not done. The water was shared more or less equally. No one ever tried to get much more than his share, and was gone in a few minutes. Once the last 3, up against the forward wall of the box, got none, the jug being dry when it came to them. The next day, 2 of them insisted on being first in line, and they were. The third lay huddled in his front corner, unstirring, and nobody saw to it that he got his share. Why didn't I try to? I don't know. That was the 4th day in the truck. If I had been passed over, I'm not sure I would have made the effort to get my share. I was aware of his thirst and his suffering, and the sick man's and the others, much as I was aware of my own. I was unable to do anything about any of this suffering, and therefore I accepted it, as they did, placidly. I know that people might behave very differently in the same circumstances. These were Argota, people trained from birth in a discipline of cooperation, obedience, submission to a group purpose ordered from above. The qualities of independence and decision were weakened in them. They had not much capacity for anger. They formed a whole, I among them. Each felt it, and it was a refuge and true comfort in the night, that wholeness of the huddled group, each drawing life from the others. But there was no spokesman for the whole. It was headless, passive. Men whose will was tempered to a sharper edge might have done better, talked more, shared the water more justly, given more ease to the sick, and kept their courage higher. I don't know. I only know what it was like inside that truck. On the 5th morning, if my count is right, from the day I wakened in the truck, it stopped. We heard talking outside and calling back and forth. The steel rear doors were unbolted from the outside and flung wide open. One by one, we crept to that open end of the steel box, some on hands and knees, and jumped or crawled down onto the ground. 24 of us did. 2 dead men, the old corpse and a new one, the one who had not got his drink of water for 2 days, were dragged out. It was cold outside, so cold and so glaring with white sunlight on white snow that to leave the fetid shelter of the truck was very hard, and some of us wept. We stood bunched up beside the great truck, all of us naked and stinking, our little hole, our night an entity exposed to the bright, cruel daylight. They broke us up, made us form a line, and led us towards a building a few hundred yards away. The metal walls and snow-covered roof of the building, the plain of snow all around, the great range. We were lined up to wash ourselves at a big trough in a frame hut. Everybody began by drinking the wash water. After that, we were led into the main building and given undershirts, gray felt shirts, breeches, leggings, and felt boots. A guard checked off our names on a list as we filed into the refectory, where, with 100 or more other people in gray, we sat at bolted down tables and were served breakfast, grain porridge and beer. After that, the whole lot of us, new prisoners and old, were divided up into squads of 12. My squad was taken to a sawmill a few hundred yards behind the main building, inside the fence. Outside the fence, and not far from it, a forest began that covered the folded hills as far to northward as the eye could see. Under the direction of our guard, we carried and stacked sawn boards from the mill to a huge shed where lumber was stored through the winter. It was not easy to walk, stoop, and lift loads after the days in the truck. They didn't let us stand idle, but they didn't force the pace either. In the middle of the day, we were served a cupful of the unfermented grain brew, orsh. Before sunset, we were taken back to the barracks and given dinner, porridge with some vegetables, and beer. By nightfall, we were locked into the dormitory, which was kept fully lighted all night. We slept on 5-foot-deep shelves all around the walls of the room in 2 tiers. Old prisoners scrambled for the upper tier, the more desirable, since heat rises. For bedding, each man was issued a sleeping bag at the door. They were coarse, heavy bags, foul with other men's sweat, but well insulated and warm. The drawback for me was their shortness. An average-sized Gathenian could get clear inside, head and all, but I couldn't, nor could I ever stretch out fully on the sleeping shelf. The place was called Pulafen Commensality, 3rd Voluntary Farm and Resettlement Agency. Pulfen, District 30, is in the extreme northwest of the habitable zone of Orgarain, bounded by the Sembensane Mountains, the Esagel River, and the coast. The area is thinly settled, without big cities. The town nearest us was a place called Turif, several miles to the southwest. I never saw it. The farm was on the edge of a great unpopulated forest region, Taranpeth. Too far north for the larger trees, Hemen or Sarum or black vate, the forest was all one kind of tree, a gnarled, scrubby conifer 10 or 12 feet high, gray-needled, called Thore. Though the number of native species, plant or animal, on winter is unusually small, the membership of each species is very large. There were thousands of square miles of Thore trees, and nothing much else in that forest. Even the wilderness is carefully husbanded there. And though that forest had been logged for centuries, there were no waste places in it, no desolations of stumps, no eroded slopes. It seemed that every tree in it was accounted for, and that not one grain of sawdust from our mill went unused. There was a small plant on the farm, and when the weather prevented parties from going out into the forest, we worked in the mill or in the plant, treating and compressing chips, bark, and sawdust into various forms, and extracting from the dried Thore needles a resin used in plastics. The work was genuine work, and we were not overdriven. If they had allowed a little more food and better clothing, much of the work would have been pleasant, but we were too hungry and cold most of the time for any pleasure. The guards were seldom harsh and never cruel. They tended to be stolid, slovenly, heavy, and to my eyes effeminate, not in the sense of delicacy, etc., but in just the opposite sense, a gross, bland fleshiness, a bovinity without point or edge. Among my prisoners, I had also, for the first time on winter, a certain feeling of being a man among women, or among eunuchs. The prisoners had that same flabbiness and coarseness. They were hard to tell apart. Their emotional tone seemed always low, their talk trivial. I took this lifelessness and leveling at first for the effect of the privation of food, warmth, and liberty. But I soon found out that it was more specific an effect than that. It was the results of the drugs given all prisoners to keep them out of Kemer. I knew that drugs existed which could reduce or virtually eliminate the potency phase of the Gathenian sexual cycle. They were used when convenience, medicine, or mortality convenience, medicine, or morality dictated abstinence. One chimera or several could be skipped thus without ill effect. The voluntary use of such drugs was common and accepted. It had not occurred to me that they might be administered to unwilling persons. There were good reasons. A person in chimera would be a disruptive element in his work squad. If let off work, what was to be done with him, especially if no other prisoner was in chimera at the time, as was possible, there being only some 150 of us? To go through chimera without a partner is pretty hard on a Gathenian. Better, then, simply obviate the misery and wasted work time, and not go through chimera at all. So they prevented it. Prisoners who had been there for several years were psychologically, and I believe to some extent, physically adapted to this chemical castration. They were as sexless as steers. They were without shame and without desire, like the angels. But it is not human to be without shame and without desire. Being so strictly defined and limited by nature, the sexual urge of Gathenians is really not much interfered with by society. There is less coding, channeling, and repressing of sex there than in any bisexual society I know of. Abstinence is entirely voluntary. Indulgence is entirely acceptable. Sexual fear and sexual frustration are both extremely rare. This was the first case I had seen of the social purpose running counter to the sexual drive. Being a suppression, not merely a repression, it produced not frustration, but something more ominous, perhaps, in the long run: passivity. There are no communal insects on winter. Gathenians do not share their earth as Terrans do with those older societies, those innumerable cities of little sexless workers possessing no instinct but that of obedience to the group, the whole. If there were ants on winter, Gathenians might have tried to imitate them long ago. The regime of the voluntary farms is a fairly recent thing, limited to one country of the planet and literally unknown elsewhere. But it is an ominous sign of the direction that a society of people so vulnerable to sexual control might take. At Pulafen Farm, we were, as I said, underfed for the work we did, and our clothing, particularly our footgear, was completely inadequate for that winter climate. The guards, most of them probationary prisoners, were not much better off. The intent of the place and its regime was punitive, but not destructive, and I think it might have been endurable without the druggings and the examinations. Some of the prisoners underwent the examination in groups of 12. They merely recited a sort of short confessional and catechism, got their anti-chemer shot, and were released to work. Others, the political prisoners, were subjected every 5th day to questioning under drugs. I don't know what drugs they used. I don't know the purpose of the questioning. I have no idea what questions they asked me. I would come to myself in the dormitory after a few hours, laid out on the sleeping shelf with 6 or 7 others, some waking like myself, some slack and blank in the grip of the drug. When we were all afoot, the guards would take us out to the plant to work, but after the 3rd or 4th of these examinations, I was unable to get up. They let me be, and the next day I could go out with my squad, though I felt shaky. After the next examination, I was helpless for 2 days. Either the anti-chemer hormones or the viridicals evidently had a toxic effect on my non-Gathenian nervous system, and the effect was cumulative. I remember planning how I would plead with the inspector when the next examination came. I would start by promising to answer truthfully anything he asked without drugs, and later I would say to him, "Sir, don't you see how useless it is to know the answer to the wrong question?" Then the inspector would turn into Faxa with the foreteller's golden chain around his neck, and I would have long conversations with Faxa, very pleasantly, while I controlled the drip of acid from a tube into a vat of pulverized wood chips. Of course, when I came to the little room where they examined us, the inspector's aide had pulled back my collar and given me the injection before I could speak. And all I remember from that session, or perhaps the memory is from an earlier one, is the inspector, a tired-looking young Orgota with dirty fingernails, saying drearily, "You must answer my questions in Orgota. You must not speak any other language. You must answer in Orgota." There was no infirmary. The principle of the farm was work or die, but there were leniencies in practice, gaps between work and death provided by the guards. As I said, they were not cruel, neither were they kind. They were slipshod and didn't much care, so long as they kept out of trouble themselves. They let me and another prisoner stay in the dormitory, simply left us there in our sleeping bags as if by oversight, when it was plain that we could not stand up on our feet. I was extremely ill after the last examination. The other, a middle-aged fellow, had some disorder or disease of the kidney and was dying. As he could not die all at once, he was allowed to spend some time at it on the sleeping shelf. I remember him more clearly than anything else in Pullefen Farm. He was physically a typical Gethenian of the great continent, compactly made, short-legged and short-armed, with a solid layer of subcutaneous fat giving him, even in illness, a sleek roundness of body. He had small feet and hands, rather broad hips, and deep chests, the breasts scarcely more developed than in any male of my race. His skin was dark ruddy brown, his black hair fine and fur-like. His face was broad, with small, strong features, the cheekbones pronounced. It is a type not unlike that of various isolated Terran groups living in very high altitudes or Arctic areas. His name was Azra. He had been a carpenter. We talked. Azra was not, I think, unwilling to die, but he was afraid of dying. He sought distraction from his fear. We had little in common other than our nearness to death, and that was not what we wanted to talk about. So, much of the time, we did not understand each other very well. It did not matter to him. I, younger and incredulous, would have liked understanding, comprehension, explanation. But there was no explanation. We talked. At night, the barracks dormitory was glaring, crowded, and noisy. During the day, the lights were turned off, and the big room was dusky, empty, still. We lay close together on the sleeping shelf and talked softly. Azra liked best to tell long, meandering tales about his young days on a Commensal farm in the Kunderer Valley, that broad, splendid plain I had driven through coming from the border to Mishnori. His dialect was strong, and he used many names of people, places, customs, tools that I did not know the meaning of, so I seldom caught more than the drift of his reminiscences. When he was feeling easiest, usually around noon, I would ask him for a myth or tale. Most Gethenians are well stuffed with these. Their literature, though it exists in written form, is a live oral tradition, and they are all in this sense literate. Asra knew the Orgota staples, the short tales of Mesha, the tale of Parsid, parts of the great epics, and the novel-like Sea Traders saga. These and bits of local lore recalled from his childhood he would tell in his soft, slurry dialect, and then, growing tired, would ask me for a story. "What do they tell in Karhide?" he would say, rubbing his legs, which tormented him with aches and shooting pains, and turning to me his face with its shy, sly, patient smile. Once I said, "I know a story about people who live on another world." "What kind of world would that be?" "One like this one, all in all, but it doesn't go around the sun. It goes around the star you call Selimi. That's a yellow star like the sun, and on that world, under that sun, live other people." That's in the Sanavoy teachings, that about the other worlds. There used to be an old Sanovi, a crazy priest who would come by my hearth when I was little and tell us children all about that, where the liars go when they die, and where the suicides go, and where the thieves go. That's where we're going, me and you, eh? One of those places? No, this I'm talking of isn't a spirit world. A real one. The people that live on it are real people, alive, just like here. But very long ago, they learned how to fly. Azra grinned. Not by flapping their arms, you know. They flew in machines, like cars. But it was hard to say in Argota, which lacks a word meaning precisely to fly. The closest one can come has more the meaning of glide. Well, they learned how to make machines that went right over the air as a sludge goes over snow. After a while, they learned how to make them go farther and faster, till they went like the stone out of a sling off the earth and over the clouds and out of the air, clear to another world, going around another sun. And when they got to that world, what did they find there but men? Sliding in the air? Maybe, maybe not. When they got to my world, we already knew how to get about in the air. But they taught us how to get from world to world. We didn't yet have the machines for that. Azra was puzzled by the injection of the teller into the tale. I was feverish, bothered by the sores which the drugs had brought out on my arms and chest, and I could not remember how I had meant to weave the story. Go on, he said, trying to make sense of it. What did they do besides go in the air? Oh, they did much as people do here, but they're all in Khmer all the time. He chuckled. There was, of course, no chance of concealment in this life, and my nickname among the prisoners and guards was inevitably the pervert. But there is no desire and no shame. But where there is no desire and no shame, no one, however anomalous, is singled out. And I think Azra made no connection of this notion with myself and my peculiarities. He saw it merely as a variation on an old theme, and so he chuckled a little and said, In Khmer all the time. Is it a place of reward, then, or a place of punishment? I don't know, Asra. Which is this world? Neither, child. This here is just the world, it's how it is. You get born into it, and things are as they are. I wasn't born into it. I came to it. I chose it. The silence and shadow hung around us. Away off in the country, silence beyond the barracks walls, there was one tiny edge of sound, a hacksaw keening, nothing else. Ah well, Azra murmured, and sighed and rubbed his legs, making a little moaning sound that he was not aware of himself. We none of us choose, he said. A night or two after that, he went into a coma and presently died. I had not learned what he had been sent to the voluntary farm for, what crime or fault or irregularity in his identification papers, and knew only that he had been in Pulifen Farm less than a year. The day after Asra's death, they called me in for examination. This time, they had to carry me in, and I can't remember anything further than that. Let's see. So then chapter 14 is great. Just a second. Chapter 14, The Escape. When Obsley and Yege both left town, and Slosa's doorkeeper refused my entrance, I knew it was time to turn to my enemies, for there was no more good in my friends. I went to Commissioner Shuskis and blackmailed him. Lacking sufficient cash to buy him with, I had to spend my reputation. Among the perfidious, the name of traitor is capital in itself. I told him that I was in Orgarain as an agent of the nobles' faction in Karhide, which was planning the assassination of Tybe, and that he had been designated as my Sarf contact. If he refused to give me the information I needed, I would tell my friends in Erenrong that he was a double agent, serving the open trade faction, and this word would of course get back to Mishnori and to the Sarf, and the damned fool believed me. He told me quick enough what I wanted to know. He even asked me if I approved. I was not in immediate danger from my friends, Obsle Yege and the others. They had bought their safety by sacrificing the envoy and trusted me to make no trouble for them or myself. Until I went to Shuskis, no one in the Sarf but Gom had considered me worthy of their notice, but now they would be hard at my heels. I must finish my business and drop out of sight. Having no way to get word directly to anyone in Karhide, as mail would be read and telephone or radio listened to, I went for the first time to the royal embassy. Sardon Remir Chenowich, who I had known well at court, was on the staff there. He agreed at once to convey to Argovan a message stating what had become of the envoy and where he was to be imprisoned. I could trust Chenowich, a clever and honest person, to get the message through unintercepted, though what Argovan would make of it or do with it I could not guess. I wanted Argovan to have that information in case I's starship did come falling suddenly down out of the clouds, for at that time I still kept some hope that he had signaled the ship before the Sarf had arrested him. I was now in peril, and if I had been seen to enter the embassy in instant peril. I went straight from its door to the caravan port on the south side, and before noon of that day, Odstrathsusmi, I left Mishnori as I had entered it, as carry loader on a truck. I had my old permits with me, a little altered to fit the new job. Forgery of papers is risky in Orgarain, where they are inspected 52 times daily, but it is not rare for being risky, and my old companions in Fish Island had shown me the tricks of it. To wear a false name galls me, but nothing else would save me or get me clear across the width of Orgarain to the coast of the Western Sea. My thoughts were all there in the west as the caravan went rumbling across the Kundarir Bridge and out of Mishnori. Autumn was facing towards winter now, and I must get to my destination before the roads closed to fast traffic, and while there was still some good in getting there. I had seen a voluntary farm over in Komsvasham when I was in the Sinath administration, and had talked with ex-prisoners of the farms. What I had seen and heard lay heavy on me now. The envoy, so vulnerable to cold that he wore a coat when the weather was in the 30s, would not survive winter in Pulafen. Thus need drove me fast, but the caravan took me slow, weaving from town to town, northward and southward of the way, loading and unloading, so that it took me a half-month to get to Ethwen, at the mouth of the river Essagel. In Ethwen, I had luck. Talking with men in the transient house, I heard of the fur trade up the river, how licensed trappers went up and down the river by sledge or iceboat through Taranpeth forest almost to the ice. Out of their talk of traps came my plan of traps springing. There are white fur pestry in Kerm land, as in the Gobrin hinterlands. They like places that lie under the breath of the glacier. I had hunted them when I was young in the Thore forests of Kerm. Why not go trapping them now in the Thore forests of Pulafen? In that far west and north of Orgarain, in the great wild lands west of Sembensane, men come and go somewhat as they like, for there are not enough inspectors to keep them all penned in. Something of the old freedom survives the new epoch there. Esthwen is a grey port built on the grey rocks of Essagel Bay. A rainy sea wind blows in the streets, and the people are grim seamen, straight-spoken. I look back with praise to Ethwen, where my luck changed. I bought skis, snowshoes, traps, and provisions, acquired my hunter's license and authorization and identification and so forth from the Common Cell Bureau, and set out afoot up the Esagel with a party of hunters led by an old man called Mavriva. The river was not yet frozen, and wheels were on the roads still, for it rained more than it snowed on this coastal slope, even now in the year's last month. Most hunters waited till full winter, and in the month of Thurn went up the Esagel by iceboat. But Mavriva was meant to get far north early and trap the Pestharii as they first came down into the forests in their migration. Mavriva knew the hinterlands, and the North Sembensane, and the Fire Hills as well as any man knows them, and in those days, going upriver, I learned much from him that served me later. At the town called Turif, I dropped out of the party feigning illness. They went on north, after which I struck out northeastward by myself into the high foothills of the Sembensane. I spent some days learning the land and then, catching almost all I carried in a hidden valley 12 or 13 miles from Turif. Sorry, just a second. I came back to the town, approaching it from the south again, and this time entered it and put up at the transient house. As if stocking up for a trapping run, I bought skis, snowshoes, and provisions, a fur bag and winter clothing all over again, also a chaba stove, a polyskin tent, and a light sledge to load it all on. Then nothing to do but wait for the rain to turn to snow and the mud to ice. Not long, for I had spent over a month on my way from Mishnori to Turif. On Arhad Thern, the winter was frozen in, and the snow I had waited for was falling. I passed the electric fences of Pulafin Farm in early afternoon, all track and trace behind me, soon covered by the snowfall. I left the sledge in a stream gully well into the forest, east of the farm, and carrying only a backpack, snowshoed back around to the road. Along it, I came openly to the farm's front gate. There I showed the papers, which I had reforged again while waiting in Turif. They were blue stamp now, identifying me as Thenner Benth, payrolled convict, and attached to them was an order to report on or before Epps Thurn to Pulafin Commensality 3rd Voluntary Farm for 2 years guard duty. A sharp-eyed inspector would have been suspicious of these battered papers, but there were few sharp eyes here. Nothing easier than getting into prison. I was somewhat reassured as to the getting out. The chief guard on duty berated me for arriving a day later than my orders specified and sent me to the barracks. Dinner was over, and luckily it was too late to issue me regulation boots and uniform and confiscate my own good clothing. They gave me no gun, but I found one handy while I scrounged around the kitchen coaxing the cook for a bite to eat. The cook kept his gun hung on a nail behind the bake ovens. I stole it. It had no lethal setting. Perhaps none of the guards' guns did. They do not kill people on their farms. They let hunger and winter and despair do their murders for them. There were 30 or 40 jail keepers and 150 or 60 prisoners, none of them very well off, most of them sound asleep, though it was not much past 4th hour. I got a young guard to take me around and show me the prisoners asleep. I saw them in the staring light of the great room they slept in, and all but gave up my hope of acting that first night before I had drawn suspicion on myself. They were all hidden away on the long beds in their bags like babies in wombs, invisible, indistinguishable. All but one. There, too long to hide, a dark face like a skull, eyes shut and sunken, a mat of long, fibrous hair. The luck that had turned an Ethwen now turned the world with it under my hand. I never had a gift but one, to know when the great wheel gives to a touch, to know and to act. I had thought that foresight lost, last year in Erhenrong, and never to be regained. A great delight it was to feel that certainty again, to know that I could steer my fortune and the world's chance like a bobsled down the steep, dangerous hour. Since I still went roaming and prying about in my part as a restless, curious, dim-witted fellow, they wrote me on to the late watch shift. By midnight, all but I and one other late watcher within doors slept. I kept up my shiftless poking about the place, wandering up and down from time to time by the long beds. I settled my plans and began to ready my will and body to enter Dotha, for my own strength would never suffice unaided by the strength out of the dark. A while before dawn, I went into the sleeping room once more, and with the cook's gun, gave Genli I 100th second of stun to the brain, then hoisted him up, bag and all, and carried him out over my shoulder to the guard-room. "What's doing?" said the other guard, half asleep. "Let him be." "He's dead." "Another one dead? By Meshe's guts, and not hardly winter yet." He turned his head sideways to look into the envoy's face as it hung down on my back. "That one, the pervert it is. By the eye, I didn't believe all they said about car hiders till I took a look at him. The ugly freak he is. He spent all week on the long bed moaning and sighing, but I didn't think he'd die right off like that. Well, go dump him outside where he'll keep till daylight. Don't stand there like a carry loader with a sack of turds." I stopped by the inspection office on my way down the corridor, and I, being the guard, none stopped me from entering and looking till I found the wall panel that contained the alarms and switches. None was labeled, but guards had scratched letters beside the switches to jog their memory when haste was needed. Taking FF for fences, I turned that switch to cut the current to the outermost defenses of the farm, and then went on, pulling I along now by the shoulders. I came by the guard on duty in the watch-room by the door. I made a show of laboring to haul the dead load, for the Dotha strength was full within me, and I did not want it seen how easily, in fact, I could pull or carry the weight of a dead man heavier than myself. I said, "A dead prisoner. They said get him out of the sleeping room. Where do I stow him?" "I don't know. Get him outside, under a roof, so he won't get snow-buried and float up stinking next spring in the thaws. It's snowing perditia." He meant that we call sov snow. That we call sov snow. A thick, wet fall, the best of news to me. All right, I said, and lugged my load outside and around the corner of the barracks out of his sight. I got I up over my shoulders again, went northeast a few hundred yards, clambered up over the dead fence, unslung my burden down, jumped down free, took I up once more, and made off as fast as I could towards the river. I was not far from the fence when a whistle began to shriek and the floodlights went on. It snowed hard enough to hide me, but not hard enough to hide my tracks within minutes. Yet when I got down to the river, they were not yet on my trail. I went north on clear ground under the trees, though the water when there was no clear ground, or through the water when there was no clear ground. The river, a hasty little tributary of the Esagel, was still unfrozen. Things were growing plain now in the dawn, and I went fast. In full Dotha I found the envoy, though a long, awkward load, no heavy one. Following the stream into the forest, I came to the ravine where my sledge was, and onto the sledge I strapped the envoy, loading my stuff around and over him till he was well hidden, and a weather sheet over all. Then I changed clothes and ate some food from my pack, for the great hunger one feels in long-sustained Dotha was already gnawing at me. Then I set off north on the main forest road. Before long, a pair of skiers came up with me. I was now dressed and equipped as a trapper, and told them I was trying to catch up with Mavriva's outfit, which had gone north in the last days of Grende. They knew Mavriva and accepted my story after a glance at my trapper's license. They were not expecting to find the escaped men heading north, for nothing lies north of Pullifen but the forest and the ice. They were perhaps not very interested in finding the escaped men at all. Why should they be? They went on, and only an hour later passed me again on their way back to the farm. One of them was the fellow I had stood late watch with. He had never seen my face, though he had had it before his eyes half the night. When they were surely gone, I turned off the road and all that day followed a long half-circle back through the forest and the foothills east of the farm, coming in at last from the east, from the wilderness, to the hidden dell above turf where I had cached all my spare equipment. It was hard sledging in that much folded land, with more than my weight to pull, but the snow was thick and already growing firm, and I was in Dotha. I had to maintain the condition, for once one lets the Dotha strength lapse, one is good for nothing at all. I had never maintained Dotha before over an hour or so, but I knew that some of the old men can keep in the full strength for a day and a night, or even longer, and my present need provided a good supplement to my training. In Dotha, one does not worry much, and what anxiety I had was for the envoy, who should have waked long ago from the light dose of sonic I had given him. He never stirred, and I had no time to tend to him. Was his body so alien that what to us is mere paralysis was death to him? When the wheel turns under your hand, you must watch your words, and I had twice called him dead, and carried him as the dead are carried. The thought would come that this was then a dead man that I hauled across the hills, and that my luck and his life had gone to waste after all. At that I would sweat and swear, and the Dotha's strength would seem to run out of me like water out of a broken jar. But I went on, and the strength did not fail me till I had reached the cache in the foothills and set up the tent and done what I could for I opened a box of hyperfood cubes, most of which I devoured, but some of which I got into him as a broth, for he looked near to starving. There were ulcers on his arms and breast, kept raw by the filthy sleeping bag he lay in. When the sores were cleaned, he lay warm in the fur bag, well hidden as winter and wilderness could hide him. There was no more I could do. Night had fallen, and the greater darkness, the payment for the voluntary summoning of the body's full strength, was coming hard upon me. To darkness I must entrust myself and him. We slept. Snow fell. All the night and day and night, my Thungan sleep it must have snowed, no blizzard, but the first great snowfall of winter. When at last I roused and pulled myself up to look out, the tent was half buried. Sunlight and blue shadows lay vivid on the snow. Far and high in the east, one drift of gray dimmed the sky's brightness. The smoke of Udenushreke, nearest to us of the fire hills. Around the little peak of the tent lay the snow, mounds, hillocks, swells, slopes, all white, untrodden. Being still in the recovery period, I was very weak and sleepy, but whenever I could rouse myself, I gave broth a little at a time, and in the evening of that day he came to life, if not to his wits. He sat up crying out as if in great terror. When I knelt by him, he struggled to get away from me, and the effort being too much for him, fainted. That night he talked much, in no tongue I knew. It was strange in that dark stillness of the wilds to hear him mutter words of a language he had learned on another world than this. The next day was hard, for whenever I tried to look after him, he took me, I think, for one of the guards at the farm, and was in terror that I would give him some drug. He would break out into Orgota and Karhaidish all babbled pitifully together, begging me not to, and he fought me with panic strength. This happened again and again, and as I was still in Thungan and weak of limb and will, it seemed I could not care for him at all. That day I thought that they had not only drugged but mind-changed him, leaving him insane or imbecile. Then I wished that he had died on the sledge in the Thora forest, or that I had never had any luck at all, but had been arrested as I left Missionary and sent to some farm to work out my own damnation. I woke from sleep, and he was watching me. "Estefan," he said in a weak, amazed whisper. Then my heart lifted up. I could reassure him and see to his needs, and that night we both slept well. The next day he was much improved and sat up to eat. The sores on his body were healing. I asked him what they were. "I don't know. I think the drugs caused them. They kept giving me injections." "To prevent Khmer?" That was one report I had heard from men escaped or released from voluntary farms. "Yes, and others. I don't know what they were. Veridicals of some kind. They made me ill and they kept giving them to me. What were they trying to find out? What could I tell them?" "They may have not so much been questioning as domesticating you." "Domesticating?" "Rendering you docile by a forced addiction to one of the Orgrevny derivatives. That practice is not unknown in Karhide. Or they may have been carrying out an experiment on you and the others. I have been told they test mind-changing drugs and techniques on prisoners in the farms. I doubted that when I heard it. Not now." "You have these farms in Karhide?" "In Karhide," I said. "No." He rubbed his forehead fretfully. "They'd say in Mishnori that there are no such places in Orgarain, I suppose." "On the contrary, they'd boast of them and show you tapes and pictures of the voluntary farms where deviates are rehabilitated and vestigial tribal groups are given refuge. They might show you around the 1st District voluntary farm just outside Mishnori, a fine showplace from all accounts. If you believe we have farms in Karhide, Mr. I, you overestimate us seriously. We are not a sophisticated people." He lay a long time staring at the glowing chabe stove, which I had turned up till it gave out suffocating heat. Then he looked at me. "You told me this morning, I know, but my mind wasn't clear, I think. Where are we? How did we get here?" I told him. "You simply walked out with me." "Mr. I, any one of you prisoners, or all of you together, could have walked out of that place any night. If you weren't starved, exhausted, demoralized on drugs, and if you had winter clothing, and if you had somewhere to go. There's the catch. Where would you go? To a town? No papers, you're done for. Into the wilderness? No shelter, you're done for. In summer, I expect they bring more guards into Pulafen Farm. In winter, they use winter itself to guard it." He was scarcely listening. "You couldn't carry me 100 feet, Estrevan, let alone run, carrying me a couple of miles cross-country in the dark." "I was in Dotha." He hesitated. "Voluntarily induced?" "Yes." "You are one of the Handarata?" "I was brought up in the Handara and indwelt 2 years at Rotharer Fastness. In Kermland, most people of the Inner Hearths are Handarata." "I thought after the Dotha period, the extreme drain on one's energy necessitated a sort of collapse." "Yes, Thangen it's called, the dark sleep. It lasts much longer than the Dotha period, and once you enter the recovery period, it's very dangerous to resist it. I slept straight through 2 nights. I'm still in Thangen now. I couldn't walk over the hill. And hunger's part of it. I've eaten up most of the rations I'd planned to last me the week." "All right," he said with peevish haste. "I see, I believe you. What can I do but believe you? Here I am, here you are. But I don't understand. I don't understand what you did all this for." At that, my temper broke, and I must stare at the ice knife which lay close by my hand, not looking at him and not replying until I had controlled my anger. For there was not yet much heat or quickness in my heart, and I said to myself that he was an ignorant man, a foreigner, ill-used and frightened. So I arrived at justice and said finally, I feel that it is in part my fault that you came to Orgarain and so to Pullafen Farm. I am trying to amend my fault. You had nothing to do with my coming to Orgarain. Mr. We've seen the same events with different eyes. I wrongly thought they'd seem the same to us. Let me go back to last spring. I began to encourage King Argiven to wait, to make no decision concerning you or your mission, about a half-month before the day of the ceremony of the keystone. The audience was already planned, and it seemed best to go through with it, though without looking for any results from it. All this I thought you understood, and in that I erred. I took too much for granted. I didn't wish to offend you, to advise you. I thought you understood the danger of Pemerhard Remir Tybe's sudden ascendancy in the Curimi. If Tybe had known any good reason to fear you, he would have accused you of serving a faction, and Argiven, who is very easily moved by fear, would likely have had you murdered. I wanted you down and safe, while Tybe was up and powerful. As it chanced, I didn't know. As it chanced, I went down with you. I was bound to fall, though I didn't know it would be that very night we talked together. But no one is Argiven's prime minister for long. After I received the order of exile, I could not communicate with you, lest I contaminate you with my disgrace and so increase your peril. I came here to Orgarain. I tried to suggest to you that you should also come to Orgarain. I urged the men I distrusted least among the 33 commensals to grant you entry. You would not have got it without their favor. They saw, and I encouraged them to see, in you a way towards power, a way out of the increasing rivalry with Karhide and back towards the restoration of open trade, a chance perhaps to break the grip of the Sarf. But they are overcautious men, afraid to act. Instead of proclaiming you, they hid you, and so lost their chance, and sold you to the Sarf to save their own pelts. I counted too much on them, and therefore the fault is mine. But for what purpose? All this intriguing, this hiding and power-seeking and plotting. What was it all for, Estraven? What were you after? I was after what you're after, the alliance of my world with your worlds. What did you think? We were staring at each other across the glowing stove like a pair of wooden dolls. You mean, even if it was Orgarain that made the alliance? Even if it was Orgarain, Karhide would soon have followed. Do you think I would play Shifgrithor when so much is at stake for all of us, all my fellow men? Why does it matter which country wakens first, so long as we waken? How the devil can I believe anything you say? He burst out. Bodily weakness made his indignation sound aggrieved and whining. If all this is true, you might have explained some of it earlier, last spring, and spared us both a trip to Pullafen. Your efforts on my behalf have failed, and I have put you in pain and shame and danger. I know it. But if I had tried to fight Tybe for your sake, you would not be here now. You'd be in a grave in Erenrong. And there are now a few people in Karhide and a few in Orgarain who believe your story because they listened to me. They may not yet serve you. They may yet serve you. My greatest error was, as you say, in making myself clear to you. I am not used to doing so. I am not used to giving or accepting either advice or blame. I don't mean to be unjust, Estraven, yet you are. It is strange. I am the only man in all Gethen that has trusted you entirely, and I am the only man in Gethen that you have refused to trust. He put his head in his hands. He said at last, I'm sorry, Estraven. It was both apology and admission. The fact is, I said, that you're unable or unwilling to believe in the fact that I believe in you. I stood up, for my legs were cramped, and found I was trembling with anger and weariness. Teach me your mind speech, I said, trying to speak easily and with no rancor. Your language that has no lies in it. Teach me that, and then ask me why I did what I've done. I should like to do that, Estraven. That's it. So, some very eventful chapters. And we'll read more again later this week. Stay home, stay safe, be well. Good night.